Hi, I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, and author, and founder of soulleader.biz. And I am delighted to be here with my latest guest. And my latest guest has so many wonderful things that she's done. I'm going to invite her to tell us who she is and what she does. Over to you, my friend Evelyn. Over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people who you are and how you'll describe yourself?
Okay, my name's Evelyn Forde and I am a head teacher. I'm currently a head teacher of an all-girls school, Coptal All-Girls School. It's in Mill Hill in Northwest London. I have been a head teacher for 9 years, but been in education for 23 years. So being a head teacher, that's my day job. That's kind of my bread and butter. But I do quite a lot of work outside of education, and I know we're going to talk a bit about that. But I'm currently the president for the Association of School and College Leaders. I do a lot to support aspiring leaders in the profession through various organisations, and which I no doubt we will come on to.
Wow, really, really fantastic. And we met at the Precious Awards last year at the time of recording this, when you had just won a Precious Award, quite rightly. And I think it was the Leadership Award, wasn't it? I think it's the Leadership Award, so it's kind of really apt. So just setting the scene for this interview, Evelyn, this is part of this series of interviews, is a series of interviews I do with leaders of all different types, of all different backgrounds, doing different work in all different settings, but it's all around leadership from the heart, which I'm very passionate about. And when we met at the Precious Awards, I was really touched by your own story, your own journey. And I just got a sense, even though you just said a few words, that I could tell that heart element was really, really, really important to you. What I found most fascinating when you talked, so you've talked about all of these things you've done, head teacher, president of the Head Teachers Association, of Teachers, School and College Leaders, but you yourself left school, unbelievably, with no qualifications. How did that, I don't know what I'm more amazed by, that you left school with no qualifications, all the stuff that you've achieved, but it's that, I mean, it says so much. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey? And did you ever imagine the journey that you would have been on after you left school?
Yeah. So you're right, Rasheed, that I left school with no qualifications. So I'll kind of just go back a bit. So I went to, no, let me go back a little bit before that. So my dad is Ghanaian and my mum is white British. And my dad wanted to go back home when I was about 10. And he decided that we would emigrate to Ghana, which was an interesting experience, never having been to Ghana and never having left where I grew up. So I was born in the Whittington, went to Highgate Primary, lived in Highgate, but it was something my dad wanted to do. So we went to live in Ghana for 3 years and I went to boarding school, and that was an experience in its own right, but I was there for 3 years and then there was a coup, so we had to come back. And I just give you that context because when we came back, we ended up living in Willesden in Northwest London. And I went to a school which I think eventually closed down because it was like one of the worst schools in the borough. It was like a real sink school.
And how old were you at the time of this? So there's a lot going on for a young person. How old were you when the family up sticks to go to Ghana, and then when you came back?
So we were only there for 3 years. So between 10 and 13, I was 13, 14 when we came back. So just kind of came back and went straight into secondary school. And because I didn't have that transition from year 6 into year 7, and you know, the education in Ghana is very different to the way it was here. I struggled initially to kind of understand what was expected and so on, but that was fine. So we went to this school, which was Willesden High in Northwest London, but it wasn't the greatest school, and schools have changed immensely since then, and just, you know, real basic things like You didn't have the safeguarding elements that you have now. So you could, you could jump over the fence and nobody would know. Did they take the register? Who knows? So I was disaffected, and I really wasn't interested in school. But nobody stopped me. Nobody said, "Oh, what are you doing? You're bright. Stop it."
So were you, so during this particular period of time, when you said disaffected, so were you, was there no, and I guess this, I think I'm trying to think how I'm going to phrase this question. I guess one of the challenges that for many people is that education's got to reach a young person and really connect with them, and on so many different levels, so that they can see their magic, the magic of education. Was there any of that there in education? No.
No. So there was no magic. There was nothing that really hooked me in, and there was no body. There was no one person that kind of hooked me in, or I could look up to, or aspire to be, or anything like that. So I spent quite a lot of time riding the number 8 bus up and down Oxford Street. And then, so I did leave with no qualifications. And at the time it was like, well, you're not there in year 11, who cares?
And can I just ask, really briefly, I'm really curious to know, what was the, because I'm really looking forward to picking up on some of the themes around your reflections as a leader now and in leadership. But what was home life like? And what was the feeling around education? Because for many of us, that thing, oh, you study, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do that. And what was the feeling around education, all the rest of it, like at home? And did they know? Did your parents know that you were riding the number 8 bus up and down Oxford Street?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because you're right. A lot of African families, my dad's Ghanaian, education, I think, was super important to him. And so when we went to Ghana, we went to boarding school, and it was all very But when we came back, it was challenging for my parents in terms of their relationship. There's 4 children, and actually they were busy kind of hustling, trying to keep 4 kids going, and food on the table and all of that. So I think things shifted when we came back to the UK from Ghana. Money was tight, life was hard. And did my parents know? Probably a little bit, but just kind of didn't have the whatever it was to kind of pull me back in.
Yeah. And when were you in the 4 kids? Which order?
Yeah, so I am the third. So I've got 2 older sisters. I'm the third girl, and then I've got a younger brother.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting, fascinating. So when you left school, was there, and I guess I'm asking this question kind of in reflection, was there any interest at all in learning, in the things that you would end up being involved in later, or did that catch up with you later, or was there absolutely no interest, or was there?
Yeah, it didn't catch up immediately. So I did leave school with no qualifications, and then I kind of did an odd job here and there, and and I had my first daughter quite young. So I've got 3 girls now, and I had my first daughter when I was 21, and then my second daughter when I was 24. So even then, education wasn't really on my radar, and I didn't see the need to go back and get an education until after the birth of my second daughter. And I just thought, actually, I need to do better by them. And I wanted their experience in school to be better than my own experience. I wanted to be a better role model for them. I wanted to be able to provide for them. So I took stock of my life when I was about 24, and decided that I needed to get an education, because I was looking around me, and the people that I was talking to or whatever, they'd all gone to uni, or they'd got an education, or they'd got a house, something of note. And I didn't have anything of note. You know, I had my two amazing girls, but I needed to be able to provide for them. And so that's when education then became a key driver for me.
Really interesting. And was it then, I was just thinking, was your first brush with leadership as a parent then? Was that when, because you talked about, actually, I need to do better by myself, I need to do better, I want to do better by my kids and so on. Would you say, looking back, that that's where your leadership journey began, in that realization in those early 20s as a mum, as a parent?
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. And I think that for me, it was really about being that role model for them and kind of showing them a better way. You know, I didn't want them to not value education. I didn't want them not to value hard work, because me going back into education was hard work. It was a graft. And I wanted them to value that, that things don't come on a plate to many people. They didn't come to me on a plate. And I wanted them to realize that whatever they were going to achieve in life, it would be through hard work, really.
I want to, you know, it's a bit cheeky to jump from then to current day. So current day, you know, you've just had a long, successful career as a head teacher. I think it's an exciting time for you where you're, I think, as I understand it, leaving the headship behind and all of that kind of stuff after, after 9 years as a head.
Yeah.
And how long have you been in the education?
24 years.
24 years.
Yeah.
What I want to kind of dive and then kind of come back and fill in the gaps. What would you say, Evelyn, for you, what is leadership? What does that word even mean to you? Because it's interesting, last year you got this leadership award. You've had a number of leadership roles, head teacher, head of a national organization, representing thousands of people, hundreds, at least thousands of people. What is leadership to you?
Yeah, gosh. I think I'd say it's about kind of sharing knowledge and wisdom. I think that's good leadership. I think leadership is bringing people with you. I'm renowned for saying that you should never pull the ladder up behind you, because you never know kind of when you might go back down the ladder, but also giving other people an opportunity to hold those spaces as well. So it's that sharing of knowledge and wisdom. And I think it's also about being a really good role model and kind of role modeling all those positive attributes that I think make leaders who they are, you know, being humble, being honest, being reflective. I think good leaders are reflective leaders, i.e. we all make mistakes, right? But for me, it's about learning from those mistakes. And I think leaders are also quite courageous, you know, like I'm about to take a step into the unknown. But I think that's all about the journey of leadership.
Yeah. When did you or someone else first see your leadership potentials? We've got this powerful moment of being mum, you know, 21, 24, and this realization, actually, I'm going to go on a journey and I want my kids to be able to flourish. When did leadership first emerge, and when did the thirst to really achieve emerge? And I say it because for many people who've had an upbringing where perhaps they feel as though they haven't performed as they might, as they well have done, there's that narrative, isn't it? You know, it's a classic one, you'll see it in education. Oh, here you are, this is how your life is going to pan out, and you know, maybe get a part-time job here and there and that. When did the leadership journey really begin, of thinking, actually, you know what, I'm wanting to achieve these things and these things? So can you fill in the gaps between that moment of realization of 24 and then the path that would unfold from there?
Yeah, so point number one is when I was doing because I didn't get GCSEs, I had to do an access course in order to get the GCSEs, in order to go to uni.
Right.
And I did an access course at the College of North West London, and I did a history module as well. And I remember, so there's about, I don't know, 15 of us in the group, and, you know, we'd all kind of passed, and well, we knew we were going to pass because it was modular and assessments and so on. And everybody was thinking about, oh, where are we going to go to uni? And I realized then that I wanted to be a teacher. So that was like, okay, I think I can do this, you know, really interested in history. And everybody in my group, because it was in North London, and people were saying, I'm going to go to Middlesex Uni, I'm going to go and do this course and that course, and nothing wrong with Middlesex Uni, but that's all we knew. And then my lecturer said, you're really interested in history, and, you know, your essays have been about African history, and he said, why don't I take you and show you a university in Russell Square? And it was SOAS, and I've never heard of SOAS. And he said, look, they are letting people on with access through the access course route, and you're going to have an interview and so on, but let's just go and have a look at it just to see if you think, you know, it will be of interest. And I think he was the first person who kind of stopped and saw some kind of potential in me. You know, I said I wanted to be a teacher, which means that you're leading your classes. And he took me to SOAS. And I did get into SOAS, and I ended up doing African history and African literature. And then I did a PGCE at the Institute of Education. So he was the first person to kind of reframe my thinking about where I was going to go on that journey. And when I really realized that I wanted to be a head teacher was my second teaching job was at a school called Hornsey School for Girls. And I just done 3 years at White Hart Lane as a history teacher. They'd advertised a job at Hornsey for a head of year, and I applied for it. And I loved it. You know, it was just an amazing experience, kind of, you know, being in charge of, you know, 300 girls, 9 tutors, and just kind of, you know, shaping those young people.
And this is a secondary school for those people.
Secondary school. Secondary school. And it was at that point that there was a program that the DFE funded called Future Leaders. And it was a program that put, as you know, kind of aspiring leaders into challenging schools on the premise that they would become heads within 4 years. And I remember one of the participants in the first cohort was this Black woman, and she did her placement at Hornsey, and I just thought, wow, you know, she was a proper role model for me. And I just kind of spoke to her about how she got on the course, what did it involve, and so on and so forth. And I just thought, you know what, if I can affect change for 300 girls at Hornsey, I'm sure I could do that for a school of over 1,000. And I think that's when my real headship journey began. And I think, you know, that was seeing somebody that looked like me who was doing that, and I hadn't seen that before then.
And so did you get onto that department, Assistant Department for Education? And that was all around to get people into headships, and particularly in environments where the schools might be challenging and so on. One thing that jumps out for me already from our conversation is, I don't know what the best word to use here is, that did you have many people, I think, who might be listening to this, might think, oh my goodness, there must be confidence here, or drive, or self-knowing, or trust, or what have you. What were the qualities that you had? Because again, by the book, you know, if you've got this and you've got this and this, then you might be the confident and so on. But if we haven't, where did that confidence or knowing come from, or that belief or that trust come from? And where did that emerge, that I can do that? Because we know that for many people on their leadership journey, the confidence confidence can be an issue, or feeling, oh, am I ready? Or again, if we don't look like what most teachers look like, you know, if we're not white British and so on, where did that confidence or knowing or that trust come from?
I don't think I have the confidence that you might be referring to. You know, I think it was more about other people continuing to tell me that you can do this, you've got this. And I still have imposter syndrome. You know, I could be, you know, giving a keynote, or I could be doing something and I think, how the hell did I get here? You know, is this really me kind of standing here? So I wouldn't say that I had or even have bucket loads of confidence. I don't think I do. I think in my early journey in terms of leadership, I had a coach. She was phenomenal, and I think it was her belief in me, because another part of my journey is that when I was on Future Leaders and applying for those deputy jobs before you become a head, I went for 20 interviews before I got my first deputy head position. And everybody else around me were either getting their deputy jobs and on a few occasions just jumping that and becoming heads. And I just didn't get the jobs. You know, it took me 20 goes before I could. Have I frozen?
You have frozen, but fortunately I can still hear you. So we can still hear you. Hopefully you'll be back in a moment.
Hope that's not a good look. I should hopefully that will unfreeze. But
I'll talk for a moment just whilst you're on that thingy, and it might unfreeze in the meantime, and the camera will turn to me. So this is really interesting what you were saying there. So what I've got a sense of from that last bit that you were saying there, Evelyn, was that there's a few things there. There's that thing around, I'd asked around confidence. You said, well, one of the things was that other people who were saying, actually, you can do this, you can do this, you can do that. So there's a thing about the role that other people played. It's interesting that you use a phrase that comes up a lot, which is this thing about imposter syndrome. I'm sure we'll come back and touch on that. And you talked about the thing about a coach, and also this thing around 20 interviews. Yeah, do you want to pick up the story from there?
Yeah. Is my internet, because my blue ring is going round.
Yeah, so yeah, I can hear you, and you've frozen still. But let's I think we'll
keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. Let's keep going, because you're still, you know, that the sound is coming through nicely.
Yeah, and you can do your cut and paste, whatever it is that you need to do, Rasheed. So I went for 20 interviews and just was not getting the jobs. And you know, I think what I needed then was not confidence but resilience. So I just kind of kept on going. I had a coach who was amazing, who saw something in me and she kept saying to me, look, don't give up. It's not you, it's the system. It's not you. You're going to get a job. You're going to get a job. And if I'm honest, I don't know what I'd have done without her. I might have given up at that point. But, you know, I think when you've got somebody who's championing your corner, then you kind of keep on going. And that's one of the reasons why I champion other people's corner, because I had somebody there for me.
Really powerful. Really powerful. I'm going to pause you there just because this thing, I'm going to pause our recording. So thanks so much, Evelyn. Really interesting. So we just had a couple of tech issues, but before then you were just talking a little bit about the journey from when you had saw this program that was there for people into the headships, and the journey of then the support that you got, because you talked about how some people were lucky enough they jumped from the perhaps from the stage before straight into headships. You had a stage of 20 interviews before you got there, and you said that the coach you had played a powerful role, because you're not sure you would have continued at that time. So that sounds as though that's a tough time. What was going through your mind then? At
that point, I was thinking, oh, bloody hell. So when you do this course, you leave your substantive role as a teacher. So I'd left this role, I'd gone and joined this course, and I was thinking, I've got 2 kids, what am I going to do? I was really worried that I wasn't going to get a job, you know. And at that point, 20 interviews later, I then began to think about race and whether that was playing a part in me not getting a job, a bit about gender as well. And I was worried. I was really worried I wasn't going to get a job. But fortunately, you know, I did get a job, and that kind of all sorted itself out. But yeah, it did not come without anxiety and worry and stress.
It's a really interesting point. And that realization, I think it's quite a powerful point, because sometimes, isn't it, we go on this journey. We know that trying to make it to that next stage or in our leadership journey can be tough enough. And then sometimes for many of us thinking, hang on a minute, is it race? Is it gender? Is it this? Or is it that? Just ask, because maybe it's a good moment to pause and think about, what is the percentage, do you know, of Black leaders, non-white leaders who are heads? Would be in, are there any stats there, and what's your knowledge around that?
3%.
3%.
Yeah, 3%. Yeah.
3%.
And if you look at the diversity in the demographics of schools, we are not representative of the young people that we serve. We absolutely are not. And that's another reason why I'm so passionate about, let's change those stats. Let's get more people into headships, because there's a lot of barriers, you know, there's a lot of barriers for just becoming a deputy head and then becoming a head. So yeah, the stats are woeful. And the DFE did run a subsequent program called, they set up these diversity hubs as a way to try and get more people into leadership positions, but funding got cut for those. So that's
when was that roughly time-wise? Because I'm saying that in terms of years, because it's interesting now, isn't it? Probably over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years, realization across the board in terms of leadership, work around equality, diversity, inclusion, equity. Suddenly there's been, but what was the time frame of this? Because I'd imagine that this may have been prior to lots of where we are currently. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the diversity hubs closed down about 2.5 years ago, which was bizarre, because it felt like that was the right time for them to be galvanized by everything that was happening, you know, in the world, in education, Black Lives Matter, all of that. So they closed down about 3 years ago. And prior to that, there really hasn't been much. That, you know, there's been the odd thing like an Ofsted shadowing program that was just for BAME leaders. So they've kind of done the odd thing here and there, but there hasn't been anything that's had longevity.
So here you are, you're now in your headship. After a long process, 20 interviews, and that uncertainty of, hang on a minute, am I going to have a role? Tell us a little bit about what is it you've learned from your leadership journey as a leader? You know, 9 years as a head, and that's just in one school, and not just a head there, heading a national organization for heads. Tell us a little bit about the main learnings, and I because one of the things that jumps out to me, you know, when I do these interviews, it'll be people across different industries, but leading a school is tough, because you've got the dynamics of people and all of the politics and all of that stuff, and you've got kind of two constituencies. You've got the adults, and then you've got the students as well. So it's a tough environment. What have you learned throughout that leadership journey?
Do you know what? I think the one key learning point for me, which I kind of knew, but until you're in it, you don't really kind of say it. But I don't know it all. And I think a good leader is somebody that surrounds themselves with good people, who we journey together so that we become a team. Because you're right, running a school is complex. And there are so many different nuances that people not in the sector would have no idea. So, you know, one of the things a school has to do is construct a timetable. And people might think, oh, that's easy. You just put year 7 on that day, year 8 on that day. It's not as simple as that. You've got part-timers, you've got, you know, year 11 have to have so many maths classes and so on and so forth. I couldn't write a timetable if you paid me, okay? It's not my bag, it's not my thing, but I'm very honest about where I am very strong, where I excel. And I think a good leader recognizes that, and I've recognized that, and my team are great. And if there's ever a conversation about a timetable, they say, we won't ask Evelyn.
So what are the bits, and that's a very powerful, isn't it, in leadership, because as you say, there are so many different moving parts, I guess, for any kind of a leader. What were the areas that are your strengths? I guess one of them is recognizing that and being very open about the knowing where those areas that are stronger and weaker is. But what are the things that, as a leader, you think, actually, for me, the strengths that I bring are excellent? Tell us a little bit about the areas that for you are magic eyes.
I think relationships. I think I'm really good at empathy and sympathy and understanding. I'm good at developing people and seeing their strengths, and that's how I've been able to build a really cohesive team, because I've seen talent and I've tapped into that talent and kind of brought people up. And just building those real positive relationships. And whilst there is hierarchy in a school, I think where I have excelled is I've been a teacher. I get it. You know, I get how hard it is in the classroom. So I can sympathize and I can empathize with how challenging it is. And I think that, you know, staff appreciate that, they kind of recognize that. So for me, I think it's about developing those relationships with staff and children, you know. I think it's super important. Once you get the relationships right with young people, they will do nearly anything for you, you know.
Well, it's really powerful, because I was just going to come back to the bit about with the students, with the young people, with their children, because I'm wondering, was the fact that you left school without the qualifications, it might sound strange, an advantage, that you know what it's like, you know what poor education looks like, you know what it's like for people to not see yourself or your talent. To what degree has your experience shaped you, your understanding, and helped you actually be a better leader? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would say it's ribbon through everything that I do in my school, you know, and I don't tell all the children about my journey, you know. I think, you know, year 11 and then year 13, they're the kind of so year 13 about to go to uni, year 11 about to go into sixth form, so I share with them because I think they'll understand it. But it shapes everything I do. And when I talk to staff, I always say things like, you know, you don't know if we are the only adult who has said good morning to that young person. So let's make sure we're, you know, whatever's happened in our personal lives, we come in, we've got a smile on our face, we're consistent, we say good morning, we ask them how they are, because we could be the one adult who is the only adult who has had that conversation with them. So my own experiences definitely have shaped who I am as a leader, how I lead people, and how I interact with young people as well. And I often say to them, because, you know, kids can be rude, they can be challenging and all of that. But, you know, I say things like, you know, let's have some mutual respect, you know, because I do respect them as young people, and, you know, and as adults we expect that back, but it's a two-way process, really. So I think my own experiences is ribbon through everything I do, you know, as a leader, and even with my national platform, I'm quite humble, you know. I don't kind of the big I am. I'm very grateful that I've got this platform, that I'm able to be a role model to others and be a role model for the children in my school.
Right. And I think that bit is one of the things I want to pick up on before we kind of close a little bit. I'm mindful about the people who are watching this or listening to this, and they might be, you know, encouraged and so on, and wondering, especially given that word that you threw in there early on around things like the imposter syndrome and so on, because it might feel like, oh, there's nobody who looks like me, or I'm the only person from this background, or why me, or have I got this skills or the qualifications and so on. What would your advice be to somebody who's a budding leader in whatever sector, and they're not, you know, they're finding it difficult, perhaps they've got some self-doubts, and perhaps they're finding the environment that they're in quite tough, like what would your advice be to somebody who's thinking, okay, I've just become a leader, or that's what I'm wanting to do next, but it does seem difficult. You know, like the moment you said, well, shall I give up? What would be your advice to somebody who's watching this thinking, well, I hear you, but I'm not quite sure how I can get through to this next stage?
Yeah, how can I do 20 interviews? Yeah, and I say, when people say, I've done 3 interviews, Evelyn, and I just can't get a job. And I say, look, it's not consolation, but I did 20 and look at me now. And I think the reason that was, and the advice I'd give is, if you can, get a coach, you know. There are a lot of people in the education sector who will give their time for free, including me. So I'd say seek out somebody for some, you know, I'm not a trained coach, but I'm definitely a listening ear, and that kind of somebody that you can pick the phone up to. So I definitely say find somebody who is there for you, who's got
that
your
role
back.
again of that coach, that person who's a mentor, maybe, who's been there and done that, and so
100%.
very, very powerful, right?
Yeah.
And any other things about how they need to be and how they need to show up, because that bit can be incredibly powerful, isn't it? That person who believes. And then
I would say,
yeah.
So 2 things I would say. I'd say resilience, I think is super important, and where you find that resilience from will come in different ways, you know, whether that's because you go to the gym and that kind of gives you a bit more energy so you can stay resilient, and whatever it is. I think that you need to have bucket loads of resilience in whatever organization you're in. I think resilience is super important. And the other thing I say to aspiring leaders is be your authentic self, because, you know, I remember on my journey to headship, I'd look at heads and I'd say, oh, I really just want to be like that person. I'm going to be her. I'm going to be him. When in actual fact, I think you've just got to be yourself, because then you're not always playing catch up. You're not trying to remember who you're supposed to be. You're just being you and showing up as your authentic self. And hopefully people will see that in you, will see that kind of humility, see that willingness just to be open and, you know, and honest about things. So for me, being your true authentic self, I think, is super important.
Really powerful. Now, I'd imagine, like in a field like yours, to a degree, and I don't know the stats or the figures, but I'd imagine, I'd certainly hope that in terms of gender equality in leadership, it looks better than in many sectors. I certainly would hope. But when it comes to what we talked about, race and other diversity, it's still a long way to go. What's your thoughts on what we can do, what we need to do in order to arrive at that place of more equity and more representation? Because again, it's interesting, you've seen that as a head, you've seen that through the national organization of heads and so on that you've led. What do we need to do as a society? What are your thoughts about what we need to do and across different industries?
Yeah, and I've been talking about this quite a lot recently. We need more. We need more training programs. And it's not because we need the training, right? Because lots of us, we've already kind of built up those skills and so on and so forth. But the reality is that there are some training courses that are nationally recognized. And once you have that, then people are like, oh, you've got an NPQH, National Professional Qualification for Head Teachers, or you've got this or this or this. So I think when they shut down the diversity hubs, I think that was don't know why they did that. future leaders, again, you know, that was another in. So I think what the new government, it's not going to happen under the current administration, but I'm hoping, you know, when we have a new administration coming in and they're looking at the sector more broadly, because the reality is recruitment and retention is the massive issue in the profession at the moment. But then if you dig a bit deeper, it's even worse for people of colour. So until they've kind of got a real lens on that, I think we're going to struggle. So I think that it can come from people like me and other amazing people in the sector who talk about it quite a lot. But actually, until we've got some kind of national recognition, I think it's going to be a struggle.
Really
so that's kind of what I'd say on that one.
Really interesting, isn't it? I like that kind of blended approach. There's the approach for us as leaders, our own journey, and the powerful role that coaches, mentors, and so on can play. But that we also need those programs to develop people, and we need to make sure it's supported policy-wise, that if we're serious about kind of representation, that we look at that. What are your hopes? So looking forward now, so we're lucky to catch you at an exciting time after having put in all that time as a head, and it's a tough leadership position, but no doubt incredibly rewarding, and leading an organization as well. What are your hopes for yourself and for anyone who leads moving forward? Because I think, maybe again, before we wrap up, there is one of the tough things when you're a leader, right? You're there, you're leading, and of course, hopefully we've got the support, and if the affiliate kind of leadership that you've talked about is really important, but nonetheless, it can be lonely, right? Can you tell us a little bit about, and you talked about the resilience piece, but sometimes you can be out there as a leader and think, well, can I step back? Can I step away? Tell us what your thoughts on that succession, or the bits when we need to step back or step away, because that can be really tough. What are the signs of when we need to perhaps take a break or step away or move away? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I bet you lots of people might be wrestling with that, thinking, am I exhausted? Do I need to break? Do I need to step away?
Yeah, so I decided to step away from headship probably about 4 or 5 months ago. And I got to that point, post-COVID, education has been, I think every sector, you know, it's been really, really challenging. And as you said, you know, I've got 2 kind of different groups. I'm managing staff and I'm managing young people. And it's not without its challenges, which have been exacerbated by COVID, around mental health challenges, around attendance to school, and all of that. But I think my work with ASCL has also kind of shown me that you can still be in the sector and not be a frontline head teacher. So that's kind of talking to the point we were just talking about around policy changes and, you know, really making a difference at system level. So I kind of got to a point where I thought, okay, 24 years in education, 9 years as a head, I'm not getting any younger, and I'm a bit tired. Headship is relentless, and I'm a bit tired, and I just realized that when I stopped loving it, you know, that kind of deep love that you have for something, I realized that I thought, actually, just take a step back and see what else is out there. Now, the thing I haven't mentioned along my leadership journey, which I would say for in any kind of organization, is I'm a big believer of networking and connections. I think it's super, super important. But I also think showing up as your authentic self and just being you in these networking situations, I think really goes a long way. So what I've done over the years and since my journey at Coptal and my school is I really wanted to shine a light on my school. And in doing that, I've met loads of people, you know, and I think my profile in terms of the work that I've been doing has really, really helped. So when I made the decision to step away from headship without a job, so I'm being very brave and very courageous, I just thought, do you know what? You know enough people to just have a conversation with, might go
Very
somewhere,
powerful,
it
isn't
might
it?
not.
And I think that's a really powerful point, isn't it? Where with being a leader, and I'm so glad you picked up on that, your network and that networking piece, because throughout our leadership journey, be it that internally, so we've got the relationships that you talked about, that's part of your leadership style, or within our industry, that we've got that visibility and that we're able to learn and share, or, for that next opportunity and so on, that we're there. I mean, it was also interesting, what struck me there when you're talking about that and your own decisions recently. It's interesting when you're often a leader, often we get the other leadership things on top. So, you're a head teacher and the Association of School and College Leaders. That is really interesting because it's often you're a leader and then we've got these extra things on top, or we've got this and that on top. I want to talk a little bit about, for those people who do also have many leadership roles, going back again to that thing about also being a parent, many leaders, that's just one of the hats that they wear. What's your thoughts about how is it that, particularly if you're somebody, let's say you're a mum, you're a dad, you're a parent, or you're a carer, and so you're leading and you've got this other stuff, how first of all have you balanced it? And what would be tips to somebody who's perhaps on that journey, perhaps like you were, and thinking, well, how do I balance the two? Is there a balance, or do I just need to accept that I'm going to do this, that this isn't going to be quite as great? What would you say there for somebody who's really struggling with the balance?
Yeah. There is that saying that, you should be able to have it all. Okay. And I think in an ideal world, you should be able to have it all. But the reality of raising young people, your kids, being a carer, doing all of that, that's really, really hard. So you've got that, and then you've got the day job, which is leadership or at whatever level. And I think for me personally, okay, can't talk for everybody, but I think, for me, there were times when my children didn't always come first. And, early on in my career, when I, as a head, and I talk about my girls, my friends would say, are you talking about your own daughters or the girls in your school? And it would often be the girls in my school, because I was so kind of like, just wanted the best for them, working really hard for them. So there were times when I think, my own children, when I say suffer, I may not be getting home at, in time to have dinner with them or things like that. What I did was I probably overcompensated. So, half terms and holidays, where should we go? What do you need? What should we do? So that kind of overcompensation. So it's, and I did it all by myself. So I'm a single parent. So, kind of just juggling the two. But I also think that what my girls saw was a mum who was driven, a mum who, worked really hard, got a really strong work ethic, which I think I've instilled in them in terms of, their education and what they want to go off and do. So,
I think that's powerful. I think what you're saying here is so powerful. I think it's such a powerful point as we begin to wrap up. There's something profound about that. I like the honesty and the authenticity that often there won't be that perfect balance, that one thing will give. And I think in so many fields, you can ask people in entertainment and so on, people say, actually, very often there is the fact that this suffers or that suffers or that isn't, or at this moment. And there's something about, but I like that thing about that conversation. It reminds me of a conversation that my sister tells me that she had with our mum, and who, like many mums, she had to work several jobs and this and that. And my sister, I think, was one, she tells when she was young and she was crying that her mum was, and then she tells a story. I don't know what the ins and outs were, because it's a conversation between the two of them. And I think it's beautiful that it was their conversation about what mum was doing. And my sister said her respect, there's something powerful that happened in that moment, that's all part of the same circle. Being a mum, being a leader in the home, supporting, providing, and so on. And at some points, the kids are going to be,
Yeah.
sometimes it's really powerful, actually. I think there's something about that that may be reassuring, isn't it? Because sometimes people are often that, am I getting it right? Any last words on, that thing about that you've talked about, imposter syndrome? Because I've got a take on that. Well, I often say to people, first of all, as a coach, I sometimes say, what's the benefit of it? Well, there's a couple of things I'll say. One, if you've got the role, then you're not an imposter. Secondly, what's the value of being an imposter in a room, theoretically, of the person who isn't around that table already? But what's your thoughts for somebody perhaps who's watching this and thinking, wow, this is inspiring to me, but I still got that little bit of doubt that I feel as though I'm an imposter. What's your thoughts? Because I think there's something in that to carry with us, because there's a benefit, right, of perceiving that in a way.
I agree, and I think that whole thing about the imposter syndrome, I do think comes with a little bit of humility as well, because, I think sometimes some leaders can walk into a room with the big I am and so on and so forth. And actually, are you really kind of emanating that kindness, that authenticity, that listen to me, so I think a little sprinkling of imposter syndrome keeps us on our toes, right? Makes us not become complacent about, the position and the space that we are fortunate enough to have. So it doesn't keep me up at night, but, often I could walk into a room, a conference, wherever that is. And, I look around and I might be the only person of color in the room, I might be one of a handful of women in a room, and there's a tiny bit of me is a bit like, should I be here? Makes me question, but then I think, damn right I should be here. I've worked hard for this. So I think that thing about imposter syndrome, a little sprinkle of it is enough. I don't think you need more than a sprinkle, just to kind of keep us going.
Lovely. And I think the last question I want to ask you, it's funny that this Soul Leader interview, I haven't directly used the word, I don't think, heart or soul directly so far, although I think it's so implied. And there is you talk about this ribbon throughout I think that's a lovely term that you've talked about, that ribbon. So it's more than a thread. I like that, it's a ribbon throughout. What role for you does the heart, does compassion, intuition and this kindness play? And you did touch on these things. There's a moment where you did touch on that. What role does it play in leadership for you?
I think you struggle to be a leader without that. I think that generosity of spirit, that kindness, that understanding, that recognition that if you're not born with a silver spoon in your mouth, that you've had to work really hard, but actually you working hard has just enabled you to create some space for others to come. And I think that's about being generous of your time. I think that's being kind to yourself and to others as well. I think all of those things are super important, because I think without them, I don't think you can be the authentic leaders that we need in the world, actually.
Wonderful, wonderful. I like that. And just to close, what would be your 3 pieces of advice for any leader who's watching this on their journey? If you could, you're only, especially at this particular point, as you're ready to, walk off the stage and rest or move on to the next thing and so on, 3 pieces of advice. If people, they're sat there, there's people are there to celebrate all of those, the time in your career, and you're only allowed to give 3 pieces of advice to any leader. And they're a mixture of people who've been in leadership for a long time, and some of them are new leadership. Your 3 pieces of advice for anyone who's watching this.
I think number 1, I don't think it matters where you are in your leadership journey, because there's often another layer above you. So I would say, don't rush. I would always say harness your craft so that you're pretty good when you get to that position. I think in education in particular, there's a lot of young heads or young deputies who are hungry to be ahead. And I always say, hone your craft, take your time. There really is no rush. So that's number 1. Number 2, I would say on that leadership journey, look after you. Because we spoke about it being a lonely place at the top. So do whatever it is that do whatever it is that is good for you. So really look after yourself and your leadership journey. And then finally, and I've mentioned this before, but I say it always, never pull the ladder up behind you. I just think tapping talent around you and not pulling that ladder up, I think enables us to create space for other people to work with you, and other people that, you know, I and other leaders can hand that baton over to, because at some point, you know, we do need to give other people the opportunities that we as leaders have been fortunate enough to have.
And what a wonderful point that is to close, because in two ways you've done that, isn't it? Partly in that role that you play in the Association for School and College Leaders, there's that element of that development and sharing. And of course, at this particular point where you're going to be passing over a mantle to somebody else to step into a headship, there's something about that, isn't it? That succession planning and developing others and so on. Well, Evelyn Forde, thank you so much for being so generous with your time, your wisdom, your insight, and your story. I hope it inspires many people, including the person thinking, I'm going into it, I'm going to be it. I think, you know, there was something about, as soon as we met in that story, because there's something also, isn't there, about, maybe this is the last thing, I don't know if you might have a thought about it. There's something also about our story. One of the things that really amazes me is the power of your own story in your journey, and the power that that has, and that ties in with your authenticity piece. It's amazing what your story, your unique story, which nobody else has, that somebody else sees something in it and it gives them that spark that I can do that. Any last words you want to say about that? Because it's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, it's a really interesting point, Rasheed, because my own girls say to me, oh, Mum, you've got to tell your story, you've got to write your story, you've kind of, and I think what I'd really like is my stories give people hope. You know, I think that that's what I'd like, is that we all have different stories, and it makes up the fabric of life, right? And if our stories can inspire and give people hope, then I hope that that's what my story does.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I can see it in the book. I can see it in the kids' book. I can see it. I can see it right now. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your generosity. I'm going to press the stop record button, and people will be able to find you on things like LinkedIn and so on, no doubt, and people can track you down there. Well, thank you so much for being so kind and generous with your time.